Welcome, Mr. Lamy, Pascal Lamy. Welcome to this interview with the Diari de Barcelona. It's a pleasure to talk with you. First of all, say sorry for my English, for my level of English, because it's not the best one. I know it, but I am trying to do my best. Okay.
For sure, it's better than my Catalan, so don't
Okay, thank you. Let's start. I want to start asking about all the tariffs between the Trump and international trade. The U.S. Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. What do you believe about the status quo of this American trade policy today, and how is the damage that the tariffs are doing to the international trade?
Well, short answer is not much. So, Trump is much more dangerous in domestic politics in the US, in geopolitics, whether it's Ukraine or Iran or Venezuela, than he is on geoeconomics. And the fundamental reason, there are two fundamental reasons behind this. First, US is a relatively modest player on trade. US imports are 13% of world imports, 1-3, which is a relatively small proportion. And as long as the other 87% keep their head cool and do not indulge in such stupidity, this is mostly damaging the US themselves. And the second reason is that there are a few what the Americans called vigilantes who now have in several occasions shown to Mr. Trump a few red lines. And these two vigilantes are financial markets and now the Supreme Court. So overall, and I'm saying this as a trade expert, not an expert in nuclear deterrence or drones or missiles, Trump is a modest problem in trade as compared to the size of the problems he is for us Europeans on other issues, starting, of course, with Ukraine, which is our number one problem.
Okay, and you mentioned Europe. As a former US UA trade commissioner, if I'm not wrong, how do you assess the tariff agreement of the 50% between the Europe and US? I know that France has been heavily criticized this agreement. Well, you think that it's the only pragmatic way for Europe to make an agreement, or it's a submission?
I think, and I've said that publicly, I don't like this agreement. I think nobody likes this agreement. But it's a sour pill which we had to swallow to keep the US engaged in Ukraine. The background of this negotiation is not so much trade as it is geopolitics. And losing a few percentages of market share in the US, which we probably can compensate in negotiating other deals like India, like Mercosur, like Indonesia, is a relatively small price to pay to keep the US engaged in Ukraine. Now, I do recognize that we have no guarantee that the US will keep helping Ukraine resist this Russian aggression, as we do. I do recognize that there is no guarantee, but I also recognize that if we had counter-reacted as we can do it with the trade defense instruments which we have, we might have triggered a negative Trumpian reaction on Ukraine, which again I think is a much bigger price than what we have to pay, which is, by the way, relatively limited. Not least because what we export in the US is not hair dryers or microwave or vacuum cleaners. What we export in the US is relatively high value addition, and we can eat a little bit on the margins of the exporter, of the importer, although we all know, and all economic studies, including recent ones in the US, show that the one that pays for these tariffs is 60% consumer, 20% importer, 20% exporter, given the range of trade which we have with the US.
Mm-hmm. Currently, the World Trade Organization, that you, of course, are one of the most experts about that because you worked there so many years leading this organization, it's technically paralyzed, if I'm not wrong. The US has the US, I say that the US blocked the renewal of the appellate body.
No. Yes, the US have left de facto the dispute settlement system, but another one has replaced it on the initiative of the European Union, which allows to deal with most countries. The only significant countries that have not joined this new process, which adjudicates disputes among parties when there is a dispute, which is called the MPIA, and I don't remember exactly, multilateral something agreement, which was done on the initiative of the EU. So the reality is that the US have left the dispute settlement and de facto left the WTO, although they will not do it de jure for a number of reasons. But the WTO, they have paralyzed the dispute settlement as far as disputes with the US is concerned. And this was to be expected, given that they sit for the moment on each and every commitment they have taken previously at the WTO. The whole of the principles of trade policy of Mr. Trump are in total contradiction with the commitments which they have been taking for the last 50 years with the GATT and the WTO. So it's not very surprising that they've managed to keep themselves out of the dispute settlement.
But you
when we have a dispute between EU and China, or EU and Colombia, or EU and South Africa, this new parallel dispute settlement system is in a position to adjudicate it.
But you think, as a former leader, that that the World Trade Organization is in a good health?
No, I'm not saying this, but there's a difference between being dead and not being in good health. Thanks God for many people on this planet. The truth is that the rule book of the WTO has not been adjusted for a long time, which is a risk of losing relevance with new topics like digital trade, for instance, or like environmental measures, and these are things which have appeared for the last 10 or 15 years. It's true that the WTO, as it is, very poorly disciplined a number of trade obstacles such as Chinese subsidies or overcapacities, and that's a reality, and I personally regret it. But that dates from when before China joined the WTO in the years 2000. So I'm not saying it's in good shape. It's lagging behind. There is a need to sort of reinforce it. But of course, for the moment, this can only happen without the US. So we have to live in a situation where the US are not active, hoping that they will not formally oppose new agreements if some members would succeed in negotiating some of them.
And you mentioned China, you mentioned the subsidies, another like I think that it's about dumping and all these things that made that the Europe and US criticize about China trade. You led the WTO during the years that more or less China starts his process in this organization, and China enters into 20 and one, and you led you start your period there at 20 years ago, if I'm not wrong. When Beijing joined, you expect that today China could have this trade hegemony. You expect that? You regret about something? You think that something was done wrong or not?
Yeah. Well, first, if you look at China's trade surplus, only a part of that has to do with trade measures. Let's say 20%, roughly. 80% of this 1.2 trillion surplus, which by the way is coincidentally exactly the amount of the US trade deficit, but that's a coincidence. 80% of that has to do with macroeconomics, with the fact that China produces too much as compared to what it consumes, which is exactly the reverse of the US. The US are consuming too much as compared to what they produce. The problem is that the US trade deficit is not a problem for the other countries who are happy to sell to the US. The problem being that the Chinese surplus is a big problem for many countries. And this 80% of the problem can only be addressed by China rebalancing its macroeconomic model, which they've been saying they wanted to do, they had to do for the last 15 years, dual circulation, relying less on exports and more on domestic consumption, which so far has failed. So there is a failure of US-Chinese leadership. They do not succeed in doing what they say they should do. But that's for the big part. Now, then there is another part, which is more trade measure related, which has to do with market opening. The Chinese market is relatively open, much more than other countries in emerging countries in industry, for instance, but it's not open enough in services, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why Chinese consumption of modern services is under par. And then, of course, and I'm answering your question about regrets, yes, I have one regret, which is that we, US, EU, Japan, decided before China entered the WTO not to strengthen the WTO, the GATT WTO disciplines on subsidies. And we decided not to strengthen these disciplines, not that we did not identify a problem, although we did not identify the size of the problem properly, and none of us at the time on the US, EU, or Japanese side would think China would be so successful during the years when its economy grew somewhere around 10%. But we collectively, including us Europeans and myself, did a mistake in listening to the advice of our lawyers at the time, who said, be careful, if you strengthen, if you narrow the stitches of the net for subsidies, some of our subsidies will be caught. The Airbus Boeing or MITI or other systems. And we took the decision not to open this before China joined, and that was a mistake. Because the reality is that since then, and from the beginning, whereas the level of disciplines in WTO are very high in some areas like market access, like investment, like intellectual property protection, like services regulation, it is very, very weak in state aids. I mean, what we Europeans call state aids. And this is a big hole in the racket, which of course China has used. This is where we collectively made a mistake. The mistake was not to allow China into the WTO, which for 10 years was a very good decision, and that led to a huge and rapid reduction of the Chinese surplus at the time. At the time, during 10 years, it was a good decision, but we did not strengthen enough disciplines on subsidies. And second, Xi Jinping changed the course of China's economic trajectory. All his predecessors since Deng Xiaoping in the 70s, late 70s, had liberalized and opened China's economy, had privatized a lot. I mean, the level of state ownership when Xi Jinping arrived was around 15% of the global economy. It's now back to 30%. And one of the reasons of this was the 2008 crisis, when China had to pump a lot of money into the economy, like all of us, by the way. So the China that joined WTO in the year 2000 has changed, and it has changed including in its economic trajectory.
You mentioned Xi Jinping, and I think that you know about Chinese or have talked in your life with more Chinese political elite than others European leaders. You think that they will change all these things that you are saying?
I mean, I'm working with China. I go there once or twice a year. There is a debate within the Chinese leadership about this, and for the moment, the sort of Leninist economic agenda of Mr. Xi Jinping has prevailed over different views that say that for the good of China itself, leaving aside what these long-nosed foreigners believe is good for China or not, a number of people, including good and serious academics in China, say that the priority should be to reflate domestic consumption, increase taxes, and build up a much more sophisticated welfare system, which is back to good old principles that date that we in the Western world have known at the time of the Industrial Revolution, and then later. Remember Mr. Ford saying he had to pay his workers enough so that they can buy the cars. And this is where China is now. And they have not succeeded in addressing this problem. The Chinese economy is a deflationist one at this stage. And one of the reasons of their trade surplus is, there are many reasons. They've invested incredibly cleverly in new domains where we have let them go first, like rare earths, like digital, like electric vehicles. So they have a sort of innovative capacity which they have developed without, of course, having to take care of Chinese losers. The big difference between a democracy and a more totalitarian system is that in a democracy you have to take on board the problems of trade losers. If you open trade, you have winners, you have losers. I've always said trade opening is efficient because it is painful, and it is painful because it is efficient to create value. So the Chinese success has a lot to do with their industrial policy, with their planning capacity, with the power of their political system that does not address opposition based on the negative Schumpeterian impact of a trade opening, but they also have a problem with the prices. They also have a problem with their currency, which as a consequence of this deflation is now underpriced. So there are a series of macroeconomic issues which go beyond the sort of normal remit of the World Trade Organization, which deals basically with obstacles to trade, tariffs, subsidies, non-tariff measures, and other obstacles to trade of this kind.
Mm-hmm. I have only a couple of questions more, if we have time. I feel that maybe Europe is a little bit lost in this new context of the international trade because the problems with Trump and the tariffs, because I feel that, and as you say, Europe doesn't trust as much China. Everything is broken, obviously, with Russia. How Europe has to analyze and move in this context. Maybe Europe is not wasn't prepared for the end of globalization. I'm not saying that the globalization has ended, but a lot of analysts, and this is a current topic that a lot of people are talking about. And well, I want to know your opinion.
Yeah. Well, first, this is not just a European problem. This is a problem for everybody. Including non-EU belonging European countries, including Japan, including Korea, including Africa, including India. So it's not just a European problem. But this being said, we have to decide for Europeans, not for Indians or Japanese or Koreans. I think this is a big issue, bigger than what we expected, and we now can see the size of the Chinese impact on value chains overall, whether it's mostly in industry, although not in services at this stage. So this is mostly an industrial problem, and it's mostly a problem for our industry, not for 70% of our economy, which is done with services. I think the strategy is twofold. First, we have to improve our competitiveness, and there is something obvious to be done, on which the Jacques Delors Friends of Europe new foundation has decided to start a big campaign under the leadership of Enrico Letta, which is get the bloody internal market done by 2028. We have a pit of efficiencies under our feet, which is not exploited because of stupid national resistances here and there. Whether it's the financial system, whether it's energy systems, whether it's digital systems, these are three areas where we are totally underperforming as compared to what we should do together in completing this internal market. And we are doing a big campaign, again with this new foundation, in order to put more pressure on the Commission and on Member States. This is a large part of the answer. Improve competitiveness. That's short term, let's say 26, 27, 28. Of course, we have to regain the part of, at least a part of what we've lost at the frontier of innovation. This is a sort of more long-term, 5-10-year issue, and there are many things to be done in this direction. And then we have to better protect some sensitive sectors which have to do with over-dependence, and notably for security matters. Now, this is not across the board. I do not believe that putting a tariff of 30% on Chinese exports would significantly change the situation, given the difference in competitiveness in most of what they now export to us. But there are some areas where we need to better protect through trade defense instruments, which we have, some of our unprotected vulnerabilities. And then there is also another strategy, which is to try and incentivize China to invest more in Europe, which is, for instance, in my view and in our view, and we've been working a lot with the three Instituts Jacques Delors, Paris, Berlin, and Brussels on this, for instance. Yes, we have a problem with electric vehicles, which China produces in excellent quality and very cheap. We've been waiting too long and dragging too much our feet in the car industry to address this problem. I think we now should incentivize China to do what we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. We wanted to penetrate the Chinese market, and they told us, okay, but with the technology transfers and ownership arrangements. Well, we have to do the same. We have to say to the Chinese, welcome to Europe for investment, but with technology transfers and ownership arrangements. That's, I think, one of the ways to go.
And to finish the interview, I think that I'm obligated to ask about the Strait of Hormuz and all that are happening these days. It's simple or not simple, but do you think that we are starting a global recession if the block of states will move it's about days or only maybe it's only a temporal shock, but anyway.
No, I think it's too soon to say. We know that there's no war in the Middle East, which has been triggered by the US. With what purpose? Unclear. What is the war objective? Unclear. We don't know. For how long? We don't know. So it's extremely difficult to do any serious forecast. But, and this comes back to my initial point, if this triggers an oil price shock of 30% of the price of oil, this is much more important than a 10% tariff around the US. So the questions that the US geostrategic behavior raises are much more important for the world economy than this narrow issue. I'm not saying it does not matter at all, but if we look at the big picture, and this is what our leaders have to do, the risks in the geostrategic position of the US for the economy, and I'm not saying I love the Mullah regime in Iran, but if we look at the world economy, for the moment, the risks are more with the US geostrategic position than with their trade policy.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and
Mr.
we will see how financial markets react. We will see how they react, and in my view, they remain the main authority on Mr. Trump. We live in a global market capitalist system, and financial markets. The US is, as I said, a small part of world trade, but it's a big part of finance. It's 13% of imports, but it's 50% of world finance. So this is what really matters. And for the moment, it's very difficult to say, but the risks for the world economy, including with an oil shock, are for the moment what we have to consider. Short term, medium long term, the risk with US heavy debt remains also a big concern, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
There is, in a way, finance is more dangerous than trade. Trade people adjust. If they can't, it's a bit like water. If it doesn't go in one direction, it will go in another direction. Market capitalism is agile. They will, if you look at, for instance, the decoupling between US and China, there is a trade decoupling, but that is compensated by the fact that China is coupling more with other than the US, and US is coupling more with other than China. So there is a flexibility in trade, which you do not have in finance.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Lamy,
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fantastic. This interview has been amazing. Thank you for giving this opportunity to us and to me. And yeah.